Welcome to the Debate at Go8 podcast series exploring issues and research affecting the Group of 8 universities and, by extension, Australia's economy and our society. My name's Ron Candelars. I'm a freelance journalist and producer, and throughout this series we've been canvassing a range of topics touching upon the work of all the Group of 8 universities. They include the Australian National University, Monash University, UNSW Sydney, the Universities of Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Queensland and Western Australia. Today we'll be exploring the life and times of Simon Crean, following his time in Canberra. He's now the Deputy Chancellor of Australia's largest university, Monash, and has key roles with the Australia-Korea Business Council and the European Australian Business Council. He's perfectly placed to give us an insight into the challenges facing Australia as it seeks to grow its economy through an expanded trading network. Joining us for part 2 of this podcast interview with Mr. Crean is Vicky Thompson, the CEO of the Group of 8 universities. Simon Crean, you retired from federal politics in 2013, but have certainly maintained a significant presence in the area of politics and trade with your roles at the Australia-Korea Business Council and the European Australian Business Council. Tell us about that work.
Well, even though I finished in Parliament, I see a lot of things as unfinished business. That's why the roles that I've taken on, and there are others, are really about unfinished business. In the question of trade, though, it obviously is important with the European Australian Business Council to conclude the free trade agreement with the EU. With the inability to conclude the Doha round back in 2008, we had to find other mechanisms to get like-mindeds together. The free trade agreement is one of those. Australia-Korea Business Council, in the wake of the failure of the Doha round in 2008, some of those like-mindeds we went to were, amongst others, the Koreans, to establish a free trade agreement. So I commenced that process. The Morrison government concluded it. The Andrew Robb actually concluded it. It's the question of how you see it implement, how you see it develop, because free trade agreements are just a platform from which the other levels of cooperation can continue. And as Vicky would know, we see great opportunity in the free trade agreement with Europe in terms of the collaboration between our research universities, the ability to participate in Horizon Europe. We've been at the previous government to say that we should become associate members. I could never understand why the previous government rejected it. We need to persist with the same arguments with the current government, but it provides a unique opportunity beyond just the opening in goods and services trade. It is about the cooperation. It is about the new challenges that we're confronting because of that changed dynamic impacting supply chains, impacting the energy security of many countries at the moment. These are opportunities for cooperation that go beyond just a trade agreement. And interestingly, I think what we're seeing now is because of the geopolitical changes, Europe is now much more amenable to concluding this agreement. We had very positive signals, as Vicky would know, from the recent visit to Europe. We have to intensify efforts, and we've obviously had very good engagement so far with the new government to try and bring this to a conclusion.
Just to pick up on that, and for those listening and watching, Horizon Europe is the world's largest research fund, and Australia really needs to be at that table. And I have the great privilege of being on the European Australian Business Council board, of which Simon chairs. And we've really been pushing, for the government to do that. And I think that there is an opportunity now with the new government and the changing geopolitics, as Simon said. The other aspect is that Europe as a bloc is our largest research partner. So you start to add those things together. It's kind of a no-brainer, actually, to have access to that funding. And then the third point, which you've neatly sort of highlighted, Simon, is the opportunity for reset. between Australia and Europe, and particularly with France. And, I did have the opportunity earlier this year to travel with the Business Council, and it was, and I've been quoted as saying this, it was palpable, the reset and the opportunity for reset with the change in government. And I say that in no particular partisan way, but that's just the real politic of it.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I was on a Zoom this morning with my university counterparts in Europe who were talking about, the energy crisis. And I mean, it's almost sort of wartime. Universities, I don't know if you know this, Simon, but universities in Germany and France are actually looking at closing down, and they're just starting their year, closing down because it's too cold for students to actually be there. They're having to have their air conditioners or their heating down to 18 degrees. But also major pieces of research kit like supercomputers, etc., they can't use them because they draw too much energy. I mean, these are things that we don't even think about in terms of research infrastructure. So there's an opportunity for us to actually assist where we can in terms of that sort of research profile. So the point about free trade agreements is, yes, they are a transactional service agreement, but there's a whole lot more that sits around the dialogue and the discussion and the negotiation when we're actually at the table on that. And I think that's been the really important role that the EABC, led by Simon, has actually undertaken over the last little while.
Yeah, and when you look at the strengths that all these countries are challenging, and Australia is a world leader in the research sector, whether it's climate change, whether it's energy, whether it's the hydrogen debate, whether it's the opportunities in vaccine and pharmacy. And, Monash University is the number one pharmacy school in the world.
Mm.
And there's an understanding in Europe about Australia's strength in research. What, unfortunately, the previous government didn't seem to get was that recognition that Europe had of us. They didn't seem to see in the same way. Otherwise, they would have become and welcomed the opportunity to become associate members. They kept looking at it from a cost point of view. You keep saying to them, look, the cost factor is a multiple of success. The more success you're having in terms of the contribution, of course, you've got to pay. This is no freeloader exercise. But let's at least start the negotiations now that get us in the room and start looking at how we can collaborate better, because there's already key areas of collaboration now. They can be significantly enhanced. And given the changed geopolitical circumstances, there are enormous opportunities. Because you think of it in terms of the digital economy too, the challenge that China is presenting in terms of that. You look at it in terms of cyber and artificial intelligence. These are all great strengths that the Australian research sector has, and we should be looking for ways in which we can collaborate more.
How big do you think this European market could be? Because when I was doing a bit of research on this, I noted that Europe represents Australia's most significant economic partner overall, an expanding market of over 500 million consumers for Australian goods. That's massive.
Yes, it is. And when you look at the fact that they are on the same page as us when it comes to the rules-based system in terms of the openness of trade, when you look at the challenges that they're facing, this is a big block to have a partnership with. Not just that, what Vicky referred to as the transactional sense in terms of goods and services, but where we can go with investment opportunities, with supply chains. A good example, Ron, is the question of batteries and the critical minerals and rare earths. At the moment, lots of countries have the raw materials, but 95% plus of the processing of those raw materials, of those rare earths, occurs in China. And that's because everyone went to China because of the lower cost option. But now supply chains have been exposed. So if we're going to reassess again, it isn't just a question of an offtake of the resource. We have to encourage investment and partnership with our European partners in further stage processing here. The same goes for the hydrogen debate and the green energy suppliers. Korea, for example, wants to become a world leader in green steel, and they see Australia as a key partner in further processing of our raw materials in Australia. In the past, we've just shipped out the resource. Here is the opportunity to reset that again. So all of these are being driven by the energy crisis and the drive to renewable energy. Australia is in a unique position to take advantage of it, but we need to train the engineers. We need to train the skill base. We need to have an overall position as to where we can sit, where the investment is going, but people won't invest here unless they can see we're producing the skills.
But Simon Crean, we've been talking about this sort of thing for a long time. This, ditching the old dig it and ship it mentality and processing more material here in Australia. But it seems to be such a long process. How do we speed that up?
Because there was never a price put effectively on the impact of carbon. Europe, as Vicky would know, is heavily into decarbonisation. They're having to factor that into all of their industry strategies. What they can't do in their own countries, they can see doing in Australia. So it's not just the financial bottom line that's determining the direction of this now. People also have to factor in the price on carbon. And even though governments have had great difficulty coming to grips with it in a policy setting, all businesses these days are having to take account of it within their own balance sheets. That's where we've got to try and find the new approach to this that recognises not just the opportunity, but the essential nature of coming to grips with it. Because it will be demanded. Europe, just going back to the free trade agreement, Europe is talking about a carbon border adjustment mechanism, CBAM. In other words, if other countries have not decarbonised to the extent to which Europe is setting the standards, they're talking about something like a tariff being put on it. Now, it's complex. I don't want to go into it, but Australia needs to be in a position where it can say, we can not just meet your targets, we can better them. And we can help you better yours by doing the investment and the partnership here in Australia, not just the old model.
And do you think that COVID has been a reset in terms of this notion of sovereign capability, this value-add mentality? We seem to be quite exposed when it came to pharmaceuticals, et cetera, from China. Do you think that that's all fed into this change in attitude?
Yeah, they're the two big changes. It's the decarbonisation agenda and the need to move to renewables, as well as the supply chain impact of what COVID presented. Economies have to rethink their sovereignty. They have to do it in a way that doesn't close the borders and move back to a basis of protected trade. And it's why the agenda that we are trying to pursue with the Europeans at the moment is still about openness in trade, but openness amongst like-mindeds. That's the opportunity that we're seeking to pursue.
It seems large manufacturers in the US and Europe are also reportedly looking to exit the Chinese market when it comes to these rare minerals over concerns about sustainability and stability of supply. Do you think Australia is well placed to capitalise on all of this?
Absolutely. And for the reasons that I've mentioned, that it has to be more than just shipping out the resource. It has to be recognising that if you combine the fact that we're trying to move to a renewable focus to achieve the decarbonisation agenda, then there needs to be a smarter way in which you do the value add in countries that are better placed on the energy front. And Australia, if it can develop the hydrogen agenda, and that will take time, that's not going to happen overnight, but the process that moves to transition to decarbonised fuels, that opportunity really not only presents the opportunity here in Australia, but other countries see it. And I know this in particular from Korea's point of view. They do see Australia as a key component, a key partner in the way in which they make their transition. They've always taken our raw materials. Now what they need to do is to find the means by which they can decarbonise their end product and do the processing not in their country, because what you're doing is transporting the carbon, if you like. If you can take the decarbonisation out before it gets there, that enhances their opportunity in global markets as well.
So one of the big challenges for Australia is, and we've talked about this, I think, in our previous podcast, Simon and Ron, is around this issue of skills. And there's a piece of work that, and transitioning to a new energy economy. There's a piece of work which has been research work undertaken by the University of Queensland, University of Melbourne, Princeton University, and the Nous Group, which Robin Batterham, our former chief scientist, has led. And we're doing some additional work on that. But what it shows is that we will need in less than 3 decades a workforce which is the size of the current health workforce in Australia to help us transition. And we simply don't have that. So we've kind of got this really, I think, interesting tension between having to build our sovereign capability, because there's a strong driver there, but at the same time work towards a transitioning economy in this energy space, at the same time as we are looking to work more closely, as you've just said, Simon, with like-minded, values-aligned countries, which is what we're trying to do. And I'm not suggesting we can't walk and chew gum, but these things are really hard. And we know we've got a critical shortage in engineers. We've got a critical shortage, well, in all spaces. In fact, there's a report out just recently from the National Skills Commission. I mean, you look at that list, we've got shortages everywhere, from trades through to highly skilled. But the point is, we know that 1 in 5 new jobs will require high skills, graduate or postgraduate qualifications. And so our role as universities, I think, is germane to this whole discussion we're having. But I do think that there are handbrakes on our ability to actually to contribute to this. And so I'd be interested, Simon, in your view as Deputy Chancellor of Monash, former Education Minister. You've got a close linkage with universities. You're wearing many hats in terms of the international space. Can we really achieve what we're looking to achieve as a nation? And are we as universities, particularly the Group of 8 universities, are we actually set up? Is there the policy environment right for us to deliver?
I think we can do it.
Is that you being very optimistic? I am genuinely exercised by this particular issue, and I believe that there's the will for us to do it, but the numbers are huge when you look at the workforce that's required.
Yes, they are, and wherein the ability that we have to address the workforce issue comes back to the number of international students that we have. That's why we've got to come to grips with the visa system, that if we're going to train them here, why wouldn't they want to work here? We've got to deal with that part of it better, Vicky.
And sorry, just to interrupt, only 16% of international students who study here stay here. The rest leave.
That's because we've seen international students as just a money earner rather than a contributor to the economy. We've got to rethink the way we see our place in the world. The other point I think is worth making, some of the big contracts that we are letting are to European companies, particularly in defence. These are companies that have made the point they can't get the engineers. Mm-hmm. The argument back, I think, is to talk to them and say, are you prepared to guarantee the jobs if the sector produces outcomes that meet with your requirements? In other words, it's something of a jobs compact, so that you're giving some encouragement and guarantee to students going into the profession, into the job, a commitment to employ. Why we can't use a lot of the money that's in those defence contracts to contribute towards the funding mechanism that will do the training, it's beyond me. I think that's just a logical aspect to do. But we've got to think more creatively. You think back to the transition economies in the 90s, Ron. You asked this question before. The reason we have an aerospace industry in this country is because when Qantas was government-owned, there was a requirement of the Hawke-Keating government, the Button Plan, for manufacturing in this country as part of an offsets program for buying their aircraft. Mm-hmm. Boeing was reluctant in the first instance, but now it's got the largest manufacturing sector outside of the US is here in Australia. Because being forced to do it, they found we had the skills and the capability that met their need. Now, that's one example, but this comes back to the question of industry plans. The previous government talked about it, but they didn't really do anything. They identified these sectors. So to try and answer your question, Vicky, and to you, Ron, about is it capable of being done? Absolutely. But what it requires is the right sort of framework and appreciation as to where our strengths are, where our needs are. That's why aligning the skills lists is so important. It's also understanding where the future demand is. It's understanding what our fundamental strengths are, and it's bringing that together. You need government to create a framework for that, but you need a positive agenda for the private sector to do it.
So has industry been dragging has industry been dragging the chain a bit then?
I don't think industry has led enough in this area. I believe in the triple helix model, Vicky. As you know, we talk about it time and time again, but this is the collaboration between government, the innovation sector and industry. What was lacking in the past was the government leadership. I say in the absence of that, don't let industry sit on their hands. Industry has got, I think, the need to see the opportunity and lead. But we've now got a different environment. I'm hopeful that this can come together in a sensible way. I know Ed Husick is thinking in this direction. I know Brendan O'Connor. I know Jason Clare. I know Tanya Plibersek. Well, I say when I know, of course I know them because I used to work with them, but I think when I look at what they've been talking about, it's bringing this together that can really get the results that we're looking for.
Absolutely, and I certainly know in my...
That's what I am confident about.
So I know in my discussions with the Innovation Minister, Ed Husick, and Education Minister, Jason Clare, there's a lot more alignment, Ron, between those two portfolios and those two ministers, I think, than we've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
And that is really important because just seeing universities through the education prism actually ignores a whole piece of work that we actually do in terms of the research and innovation and commercialisation agenda, which we've talked about a lot on previous podcasts.
Yeah.
So, I was a little cheeky with Simon then by saying, is that being the optimist? But I am optimistic as well, as long as we start to see some policy frameworks which encourage industry to actually come to the table and adopt that triple helix model that I think you've talked about previously, Simon.
Yeah, I was going to say, ask you, Simon, you've seen government in close quarters. Where does higher education and research and that skill sort of stuff in terms of importance sit when cabinet ministers gather at the cabinet table? That's really what we're talking about, isn't it? Like how high is that in terms of, their thinking? Do you think there's been a big shift in more recent times in terms of its importance more generally?
Yes, I think it was an important focus at the summit recently, but the major thing that seemed to come out of it went to this issue around visas. I think it has to be much more comprehensive than that. I think Tanya Plibersek had talked about a notion of the universities accord. I think it was Vicky. I think we need to take that further. I think that we really need a bigger engagement And the university sector has a key role to play in this, but so does industry. And I think we've got to find the partnership between industry, and I hope we can do this through the European Australian Business Council and the Australian Korea Business Council mechanisms, to try and find that B2B partnership that understands the importance of innovation and drive that point home to the government-to-government relationship. These partnerships that I'm talking about are about business, government, and the innovation sector working together. We need to drive more effectively what our opportunities are, but most importantly, I think from what I've seen so far, there is a willingness and a framework of the new government to try and do something in this space. But don't just wait for them to come up with the ideas. I think business has to be more active, and they need to work closely with the innovation sector about coming to government with concrete proposals that can achieve the correct result.
So, Simon Crean, you've had a remarkable career straddling so many areas of Australian life. Where do you go from here? What are the big ticket items in this part of your life now?
Well, I'm retired, so I'm in a happy position.
You sound like it, yeah.
I don't
Not
have
at
to
all.
put up with the crap of politics, the
Yeah.
white noise of politics. I always remember that politics is reality versus perception. The reality is that 90% of it's perception and 10% reality. I wish it was different. What I'm trying to deal with now is the circumstances in which you look at, what your experience has been, what worked, what didn't work, what still is the framework that exists that can be built upon. The game has changed. It's changed in a way that is fortuitous for Australia. And it's for Australia to make the most of this opportunity. I think we have a government that is showing the right signs to see that happen, and I want to see it realise that potential. So for me, I see a lot of unfinished business in it. I'll play whatever role I can, but I'll do it in a way that doesn't have to have me dealing with the stresses of the crap that goes on in politics daily. And we still see it.
But you are quite optimistic about Australia's future in the long term.
I have always been an optimist. I have great confidence in the strength of and the opportunity of this economy. And the more that you look at the things that make it up, the more that you look at how we've made the transition, the more it convinces you that we have greater opportunity ahead. I'll always remain the optimist. I'll always remain the person that's prepared to contribute in a positive sort of way, and hopefully to convince people that will make the final decisions that makes a lot of sense.
Well, Simon Crean, good luck in retirement, if that's what you call this. It's been wonderful talking with you today.
Okay, thanks very
Simon.
much, Ron. Thanks, Vicky.
Thanks for your company today. If you'd like more information about the issues raised in this podcast or other related topics, please visit our website at go8.edu.au. And a quick reminder that you can always tune in to the debate at Go8 on Spotify, Google, Apple or YouTube. Bye for now.